Great. Welcome, everybody. Welcome to the next installment of a Gen3 Community Forum series. I'm Michael Fitzsimons, the Director of Research Programs and Outreach for the Center for Translational Data Science at the University of Chicago, which is the sort of chief maintainer organization for Gen3. I'm especially excited about this event since we're focused really entirely on the Gen3 development roadmap for the next year. So I hope this gives the Gen3 community a great perspective into what we have planned for the year. Um, just some housekeeping. You're all muted by default. Please maintain that initially. Um, the overall format today is really, I'm just giving this quick introduction, followed by our director, Bob Grossman, is going to spend some time going through some important and we think interesting features that we plan to release in 2024. And then we're going to pass the baton off to the rest of the Gen3 steering committee, who will facilitate discussion among themselves, but also mostly with the audience and the attendees to get your feedback and prioritization of these items. So I guess, oh, one thing need to mention is for the second half, we're going to be using this app called Slido to get feedback. That there's a post that Claire Rye just put there. So if you want to click on that at some point to be ready for the second half of the event, that'd be great. So with that, I'm going to pass it on to Bob.
Thank you. Next slide, Michael. I'm going to keep this relatively brief. I won't go into a lot of technical detail. I think it's important to see these at a high level, but then it's really important in this meeting to get the community feedback and the discussion. And so I'll keep this brief, but I think it should be intelligible to, to people following Gen 3. Next slide. So we'll do this annually each year. We'll have, this is a stake in the ground. We'll listen to the community, and if there's strong feelings about certain aspects of this, we have certain ability to change this. We're still primarily focused on restricted funds that have to be spent in a certain way. So, we don't have a lot of flexibility, but we have some. Next slide. So we group these into 7 categories. So one of the most important is, and we'll provide details in next month's community forum. We've made some very hard trade-offs, and we're going to provide a dedicated FTE, a couple people, one from user services, and then half a person from user services, and probably a rotating half person from the developers and platform engineers, so that we have one FTE dedicated resource to support the community in terms of pull requests and other things. And that in itself wouldn't be enough, but we also hope with some of the other things that we're going to discuss today, in particular, creating integration tests that are easy to deploy, so that before people can, a lot of those integration and test cases were completely only available to internal community members, internal developers within the University of Chicago. By making those available broadly to the community, we hope to be much more efficient in responding to pull requests, because they would have already passed these tests. So this is number one, and we'll provide more details next next community forum, and probably operationalize it at that forum. Next slide. Number two, we've talked about this once or twice before, a long time in coming. But Craig's on the call, he could correct me, but more or less, this will be coming out in phases. But by the end of January, early February, there'll be core availability of the front end framework available of the new Gen 3 front end framework. And this is going to have a number of advantages. I think it's going to be coming out in phases in January, February, March, and then later. But we're already committing this to some of our projects in different ways. You'll be seeing it in we'll be rolling it internally to certain projects. We've had a whole description of this. This is very high level. It's an updated stack. It's more modular. It's has an improved developer and user experience. Essentially the same stack is being used for the Genomic Data Commons, which will hopefully create a community around this. And it simplifies how project or common specific content can be customized. And I think that's going to make it much easier with the beta launch at the end of January. Next slide. And it consists of a number of things, the new stack, but it has a front-end framework and it has an analysis tool framework. And more or less at a high level, this means that there could be third-party tools that are compliant with the analysis tool framework and the Gen 3 framework. I'm sorry, the analysis, I don't get balloons in my life very often, so I got distracted. Compatible with the Gen 3 framework, front-end framework, analysis tool framework. So a nice tool in GDC can be used here. And that's really nice. And the community can do plugins and things like this. The other advantage is for the more sensitive data that requires higher security, what this means is that you can set up, this won't be there immediately, but it should be there. I mean, this should be straightforward to do, is you could select the analysis tools you want, and they could all be pre-approved in your environment or your security and compliance environment around the commons, and they don't have to go through a separate security review or compliance review because they've already gone through that. So you can almost configure the tools as you set up your commons. Let's say an organization, we will support this with increasing software support, is running 4 commons. They want to bring up a new commons. That could be done fairly simply because the tools themselves have already been approved and you're just clicking the ones you use. So we're going to try to do more to that view, but this is a big deal. And next slide. So again, you've heard about this. The third is, in 2023, we rolled out Helm. In 2024, we're starting to use it for our production environments. There'll be a test suite running against Helm deployments that will be available to external users. This is what I alluded to, that this will make it easier for external users to test things. I'm sorry, external third-party organizations outside the University of Chicago to test things, get them basically working not only on their environment, but through the tests that are required to pass to bring into the open source code. And then at that point, it should be much easier to approve pull requests, et cetera. And then we're separately, for one of our projects, going to develop a lighter weight version of Gen 3. The motivation is if you want a commons that has some capabilities, but you want it may not may be used internally, and you may use it to interface to a data mesh or data fabric. You use it internally within your organization. You might not need a very, very large, highly capable infrastructure, but with a Gen 3 lightweight, you can run it and then use its APIs to connect to other systems. So that's one of the scenarios we're going to support experimentally this year for edge node, so-called edge nodes for uh, uh, um, data meshes and data fabrics. That's a sort of a funded project. But these are really a focus on improving the ability for other organizations to easily bring up Gen 3, and we'll be using this technology yourself and providing test suites for you. Next slide. So some of this is complete, some of it's being tested, and some of it's the fancy interfaces are being developed. But we now have a general purpose workflow system in Gen 3 that supports Nextflow. And that's right now running it's not hard to support Nextflow. For us at least, it was quite hard to support Nextflow with the security and compliance required to operate with sensitive data and with the FedRAMP and FISMA monitor we need. So almost all the work over the last 6 months, led by Artie, who's on the line, Artie Venkat, um, was around that, and all the different groups participated. So we'll have some approved containers. We have a process that we use and others can use for vetting the containers. We have a way to run them within workspaces. We'll be creating services so that there's a more service-based, API-based approach over time. We'll be creating a nice portal, but the core functionality is there either for, and it could be used for general Nextflow workflows. It could be used for um, uh, running remote queries across two or more commons in a mesh. It could be used for federated ML. So this should get a lot of use and will be a standard part of the Gen 3 infrastructure. Next slide. Um, I think, these days you can't really leave your home um, and not have a large language model that you develop to talk about. So, just to make it easier, uh, so people feel free, they can feel that they can go to cocktail parties and answer with a good response when you're asked about what are you doing for large language models. We're going to make standard large language models over Gen 3. On a more serious note, we and others take the view, there's always going to be the very large players with 100,000 GPUs, NVIDIA, A100s and H100s building models, but they don't have high quality data that the people with Gen 3 Commons do. So if we make it easy to build a large language model, a generative AI model over your data, you have the controls of how you share that, possibly with vector bases and RAG, possibly with the model, possibly in other ways. Then, through federated techniques, people can then combine these LLMs from multiple commons with high quality data, and we expect produce something pretty interesting. So we're going to start slowly. In the first quarter, I was hoping by January, but January is not over yet. We will have an initial search over any Gen 3 commons. We'll set it up for ourselves, but it'll be a general capability so that you could just do chat. You could connect to an LLM to look at the data in your commons. More importantly, it will point to the actual data being used. And then a number of us, and we hope others, I can't look at the chat, but I'll look at it later, are developing more sophisticated LLM. Next slide. No good name for this. I'm starting to use the word lakehouse because it is not only a data lake, but it has an interesting metadata, Gen3 metadata service over it. So historically, to search, it had to be in a portal. We started with the standard portal with the data model, but we added a discovery portal for studies. But we will be supporting search, one of our funded projects for, PFB or zip files with metadata in a lake. So sometimes that's called a lake house. And we'll be adding different capabilities to this. This is also important because it provides life cycle support for data in your commons. You can sort of snapshot your data in your commons this way. You can, when your project is over, you can move the data to another commons. When we make it easier to bring up commons, you could bring up commons for 3 or 4 years and then just move the data into a lake house. So this is the beginning of better support for life cycle support for data in Gen 3. I'm doing this very quickly. Next slide. This is the last slide. Um, um, we will, and we're looking for volunteers to help us. We want to support frictionless, which is a very powerful way to sort of move data between formats. We're going to commit to doing an annual roadmap, working with the community. And I didn't mention it. It sort of didn't make the short list, but we are definitely doing it. We are creating, if you think of Gen 3 starting with the commons, then we added independent mesh services, then we added workspaces. We also added meshes. An important part of a mesh is what people are beginning to call hubs, where a hub is a way to search across multiple Gen 3 or other third-party repositories and knowledge bases, et cetera, and then interoperate with them with FAIR APIs and soon computational APIs for federated machine learning. So if you think of a hub as being a way to go across, search, explore, analyze data from multiple commons, we have 3 large hubs now: Biomedical Research Hub, which some of you know about, the HEAL Hub. It's not called a hub, but it is. And the I'm blanking out. I've had meetings since 9:30. We have 3 hubs and a new hub we're about to announce. So hubs are going to be easier and easier to build in Gen 3. Oh, yeah. I forgot about it because I gave an hour talk about it a little earlier today. We have an imaging hub now for imaging data that will go live next month. So that's my last slide. I'll turn it over to others. We're looking for feedback. I'll go into a listening mode, but that's the near-term roadmap.
Great. Thanks, Bob. I'm just gonna quickly pass it on to Stephen Manos, who's gonna introduce the next segment. Stephen Manos of the Australian Biocommons. Take it away.
Thanks, Michael. Thanks, Bob. Look, I just very quickly now turn it back to everyone else in the audience and just, I guess, any initial thoughts or feedback or thoughts you had through the presentation from Bob that you'd like to highlight at this point. And really just feel free to unmute and say something.
Hi, Stephen. This is Zuba speaking. I'm really happy to see that Gen 3 is moving into a direction of a product with a roadmap and clear visibility of what is going to come at us. And it's really helpful for us to understand what you're working on in particular, because we might actually need to post image data. And and we might actually have to integrate with Nextflow. And seeing those things now on the roadmap, or seeing those things actually happening and having visibility of them is really, really helpful. So thank you for that.
Yeah, there's a question about Tess and Wes. Is Michael Lukowski on the line?
I am, Bob.
Can you, instead of listening to me butcher up this, could you give a precise response about Tess and Wes?
Yeah, so they're even within GA4GH, there's still kind of I would say there's muddy water there. TESS is an example of task execution, so specific parts of a workflow. So specific, think of them as like a particular Python script within a workflow that's doing some part of the execution. And then WES is taking all of those tasks and putting them together in a coherent way that executes an entire workflow. You can use TESS in WES, or you could choose not to. That's where it kind of gets muddy, but those are the sort of definitions of them.
In terms of our what we have now and where we're going, what's our level of WES support?
WES support is more likely to be adopted by us through the Nextflow implementation.
We don't have a timeline yet, right?
No.
Okay. Yeah, so one way or the other, we're going to have to get to WES. It sounds like we don't have a timeline. And people are welcome to help us. We had to get this up quickly. We should do it because Nextflow is sort of where a lot of the community is going, but it didn't have the maturity we needed to have isolation of security and compliance. So almost all our time went there. So we have to set up a Gen3 Nextflow, basically a Gen3 execution service that will be presumably WES compliant, but it is, not going to be done in the first quarter because we got other things. We will be doing that. If people want to help us, that would be great. Back to the moderators.
Just see Bernie's got his hand up, so over to you, Bernie.
Thanks, Stephen, and thanks, Bob, for the presentation, and to the Gen3 team. I echo Uber's comments. I really appreciate the roadmap. It's fantastic for us to see where it's heading. I have a question about Nextflow as well. And apologies that my video is off. I'm on my mobile. With a lot of the work we're looking at, there's a lot of interest in what people call trusted research environments, where you have like a data commons and an ability to run computations in a workflow. Where with something, an example might be Genomics England, for example, where the users can't take the data out of the system other than through an airlock. Is there a kind of a concept that could work here with Gen3, or have you got something in mind for trusted research environments?
Yeah, let me give a high level, then pass to Plowman. We are pretty close to being able to support trusted research environments in Gen3. There's a little bit of behavior modeling that has to be added. The Open Commons Consortium, Plowman will speak for them, everything they do is open source. We're pretty close. So if you wanted to trust it, and that's one of the reasons we well, I mean, there are lots of reasons we were late, but that's why we accelerated the Nextflow service. But I'll pass to Plowman, but the delta, especially from a European perspective of a trusted research environment, is pretty small. Plowman, do you want to comment?
Yeah, definitely. There are a few features that we need to add to get to kind of the clear definition of a clean room, just like Bob mentioned, like UBA, user behavior analysis, some additional logging, and segmentation of the data which we have. In addition to that, you have to be able to maintain that data to not exit the environment. Otherwise, it's not a clean room. It's just another environment. And we're trying to do it without, how previously things were used through a VDI because that provides very limited capabilities. And it doesn't encompass everything. You know, some of the things that we started doing right now for preparing for it, and something simple, but we created a Docker image and we disabled the download feature in a Jupyter Lab notebook. So, and then we're working through all these other tasks that do require a little bit more thought of how they're implemented into Gen 3.
Thanks very much, Clement and Bob. That's really fantastic to hear. Excited to see that coming along.
Yeah, again, if people are interested in that, and you know, everything that will be done open source for that. You know, let us know. You know, we're also I think we're going to bring on board. I don't know if he's on the call. You know, we're building. You know, OCC is building out some of its advisors and people with an interest and quite a bit of knowledge on trusted research environments. I think are going to be helping, and so that's another reason we're doing this.
Navina, over to you.
Hi, I have a quick question about the ADF framework for the third-party API integration. So we have been working on developing an application. So we're collaborating with University of Chicago, and all the data is actually from Gen3, and we are currently in our deployment stages. But what are the things that we need to like make sure if we are like trying to integrate with Gen3, like because how it works is we need to use Gen3 as like kind of like a database where we get the data from and use it for our modeling. That's how the API flow works. I just want to make sure what are the things we need to make sure before we like plan for the integration.
I'm not sure I understood that question. I don't know who's on from our team. Can someone from our team respond?
I mean, this is Michael. I was just going to say that you know, we're happy to have a longer conversation about this, Navina. I don't know if we were able to capture all of it. You know, you could try to rephrase the question, but otherwise we have a Slack message with dedicated user support that we can, you know, talk in more depth if that's helpful after the session.
Okay, yeah, I can try rephrase if you guys have time
Rolly?
a little bit, but
Yeah, Pauline, are you responding?
What do you mean?
Okay. Is the question a technical question about APIs or a security and compliance question about how data is passed?
yeah, I just want to know how we how it like I have an application and what are the things I need to make sure if I'm planning to integrate with Gen3, I guess like what are the things I need to make sure on our end before we move ahead with that step?
Just let me play it back. So you have an application and you want to make it part of the Gen3 front-end framework, and you
Yeah,
want to...
so yeah, so the application is basically kind of like we want to make the deep learning automatic. Like for example, the user can directly go onto that application and then perform the training and testing without the use of any code. So it's more of like a GUI for like developing deep learning models. But the data comes from Gen3. So now we have all the data kind of static in our own, you know, data folders. But I want to make it more dynamic model so that we are just pulling the data from Gen3 and then using that, you know, kind of querying, I would say, and then use that to train the models. We have the models, it's just we need the data. We want to use Gen3 as the database, I guess.
So probably a follow-up call is the most important. Asking the question in Slack, and we'll get the right people. At a high level, if you're trying to build something over Gen3, you probably want to use the front-end framework, and there's a documentation coming up by the end of January, early February about that. If you are doing certain things in Gen 3, you know, we have people doing certain things in Gen 3 with AI. I'm sorry, if you're building LLM generative AI over Gen 3, you might want to talk to the people in our group doing that because we're trying to create standard APIs for that. Or maybe a very much more specific question. But if you reach out through Slack, we can certainly continue the discussion.
Okay, yeah, sounds good. Thank you.
Thank you. Over to you, Claire.
Thanks, Evan. So I guess a slightly higher level question again. We're very interested in the sort of the trusted research environment development as well. So that's very exciting to hear. I think alongside that, something that we currently do external to Gen 3 is kind of all our I guess data access request and approval process that is kind of currently managed completely separate from the system. Is that something with your tree development and kind of I guess that workflows and controls? Is that something that you're looking at incorporating in your work and roadmap?
The short answer is yes. How soon it is and how we do it is a little trickier. So in the US, we use the term, for better or worse, I don't know the international term. We use the term data access committee. That is the committee that does the approval. So we have a number of Gen 3 systems that interoperate with data access committees. For the hubs I mentioned, they're going to have to sort of, if people don't have access to the data in the repositories they connect to, they're going to have to point them to the DACs. So if that's something you're working on, Claire, you know, it didn't reach the roadmap, but it's something we're doing. And when I get grumpy, I ask the question, why are we doing it two ways for two commons? And they say, well, we had deadlines. So we do want to make this sort of standard. There's a lot of, I think partly it's the question of what's the minimal thing you could put into Gen 3 with enough extensibility, because there are a lot of special cases, but we don't want to code to the special cases, which we've been doing. So the answer is it didn't make the top 7, but if you're doing it, we continue to do it, but there would be some thought required on the right design of it. Does that answer your question? I mean, I think it would be more and more required.
Yeah. So I suspect hopefully as this goes on, it becomes a more common use case, right? So I think that, you know, there will be more groups that need this. So I think, yeah, it sounds great. We'll keep in contact with our thinking. I suspect because of course we're on OpenStack anyway, and our systems are probably a little bit, or some of our requirements are maybe a bit different. It may look a little bit different, but we can definitely keep the comms open on that. It will be good.
And Bernie Pope also has an interest. So the way I would say it is there's a community activity. We're running a workshop in Chicago in June where we're going to try to bring the community together. It's not announced yet, to prioritize sort of what's required in the commons to join a mesh, and what are the minimum requirements in the commons, and sort of a standard interface to a DAC would be one of those. But, you know, I just think a small working group has to get together to sort of figure out what's the right smallest interface, because it's clear you could have very complex interactions, and some of our commons, the one for infectious diseases does, because it was coded for a particular DAC they had. But that's not the right way to start. So we could even have a future community forum dedicated to, you know, interactive, just have people show what they did, and then have a short interactive discussion of what that interface looks like.
Sounds great. Thanks, Bob.
And maybe some thoughts on that workshop you highlighted, Bob. I guess I'm thinking, you know, you've given the Gen 3 product roadmap, but you've also provided an overview of a bunch of kind of smaller products that make up Gen 3, which is actually a suite of things. And I guess an interesting topic for future discussion is, yeah, how do we just get community design input into how those things function? And the trusted research environment is one of those. And thinking about what a process might look like that's ultimately beneficial for you and the Gen 3 team in releasing a better product ultimately, and a much more relevant product. With that as an example, but no doubt there are many more as well, I think would be a good topic to focus on at some point. There was a question from Boris from UCID. Do you want to relay that verbally?
Yes, of course. Sorry, I'm just also on my phone. That's why I was typing. We've been playing with the GA4GH, DERS, and CRIP4GA standards due to a couple of use cases we're building for indigenous genomics in Australia. And I was wondering where Gen 3 sits in regards to looking at implementing these kind of concepts of that the data store has a two-key encryption going into the workflow manager, into the front end to allow highly secure data encryption system over a federated system, as that is something we are actively working on at this point in time. And if you guys are doing stuff there, we would be very keen to align and see if we can combine efforts so that we don't reinvent the wheel.
The short answer is Michael is tracking it at a high level. He's our GA4GH key rep. We don't have anyone asking for it, but we would very much like to put it in to Gen 3. So I think it would be a good use case. I'll let the other people on our team respond, but I think it would be a good use case is, can our support and giving you the integration test, could you do what you're doing in such a way that we can make it quite easy to bring into the open source code base? So there may be other people who might participate. We have no near-term projects that are asking for it, but it's one of the things that's nice to have, just not a must-have. So if you're doing it, maybe we could sort of make sure you have the right tests and things so it could somewhat cleanly go into our code base.
That would be amazing. We have built a prototype with Alexander Zemf, who's the CRIP4GH chair on our side, and Alexander Karnitz, who is the Elixir Cloud lead. So if you would be able to share your unit testing and all of the requirements, then we could make our DERS CRIP4GH implementation compatible, and it is open source what we're doing as well. So happy to contribute.
Yeah, let me just get a sanity check. Peter, when you're on the line, when are we releasing those integration tests?
We don't have a final date yet, Bob. There's still a fair bit of work to do. So I can't give you a hard date right now. We're bringing additional staff on board to help move things over. And when they're on board, I'll be able to give you a better estimate. That'll be early next month.
Okay. Michael, can you help us track this? Because it would be a nice to have, and it's going to be harder for him to bring it in without that. So we'll have to balance some things. But if Boris, please stay in touch. Let us know where you are, and maybe when we bring that FTE on, they could just see how close it is or how far it is in terms of what work is needed to bring it in. So it'll be much easier when you have the integration test, but we don't have a firm date on that yet. But
perfect. What's the best way to align with you guys?
That's a Michael Simon question. The best way is not to send me an email because I don't do well with email. Michael, how do we send you?
I mean, I think the Slack is best. You can reach out to me. I can help track it. You know, we're gonna release a kind of more comprehensive process at the next meeting. But for now, yeah, just reach out to me and we'll chat.
That's the next meeting.
Cheers.
Okay.
Thank you, Boris. Any other last questions? We're in the last few minutes, I guess, at least of this part of the meeting, and really around specific questions on the roadmap. And for Bob, in the next section, we're going to, I guess, broaden this discussion and think about kind of entirely new needs and requirements, and we've started kind of covering that off already, which is great. But we'll put more of a focus on that for the next 20 minutes. But any kind of specific questions for Bob and his team at this point on the roadmap presentation? All right. Well, we'll softly close off this part. Bob, that was great. Thank you, and team for that presentation. As was echoed. There's a question. What's the timeline for Gen 3 Lite in the chat?
I'm not tracking that carefully. Jawad, I don't have a good sense of that. Is Jawad or someone else? It's something we're doing, but not a huge priority. Jawad, do you have any idea?
I don't think Jawad is on the call.
Oh yeah. Does anyone know? It's not in the next month or two. It's a little bit further out. We have to do it this year because we have some contracts, but it's a little further out.
I think it might be a really useful thing to find somewhere that roadmap can be published online in a very simple way, and then as and when timeframes become available, given all the challenges you've highlighted with hiring and other kind of conflicts and so on, as and when those become available, they're attached to that page somehow, so there's visibility of when things are going to go live.
Yeah, and we can also, Michael, I think, Stephen, I think that's a great suggestion. And, some of the things I talked about, some are live now, some will go live in the next month or two. So we'll try to keep that current so people could see where we are in executing the roadmap. That's a great suggestion.
Yeah, we don't have it yet, but we certainly carve out some pages to kind of tracking this on gen3.org.
Yeah. Cool. And there was just one question on the slide Q&A. The question, Claire, who was that from?
It's anonymous, sorry. I don't think I can tell.
Oh, yes, it is too, yeah. The question was, aside from RAG-based queries, is there any thought to more complex query APIs, such as genomic-specific data, or is that more of an app-level responsibility?
Well, is Craig on the line?
I am, Bob.
It's an unfair, the front-end framework, the front-end framework analysis tool framework are just with specification, with additional tooling are being used by the GDC for genomic data, but
Correct.
But it's not sort of the standard GA4 GAH genomic query capabilities. That's more of a particular commons that could support that. Craig, you want to just talk for a minute or two about how one uses the ATF to support genomic queries?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it'll become clearer when people start seeing the front-end framework, but you can add your own custom queries quite easily into the commons, and just start using those. So if you had a particular query infrastructure you wanted to query against and connect that to your own app or another app, it should be quite easy to do. We have some documentation. We're trying to add more so we can get this, more people interested in doing it, but it should be easier to do, definitely easier to do than it is now, for sure.
And if it's a broader question, if I interpret the question as, in addition to RAG, are there more complex queries such as genomic genomic queries related to LLM and generative AI, that we and others are looking at that as a research topic, and we just don't know enough about how to think of that. Not the specific question what the APIs are, but what's the best way to build these things over genomic data. Once we understand the research of that, and we're playing around with systems now, then we can go back to the APIs. I don't know if it was the context of generative AI or more general queries. Yeah, for Bernie, yeah, it's not like Beacon and things like that. That would be fairly easy for someone to add in Gen3. We haven't done that. Someone should do that and then give it to us. But the analysis tool framework is designed to have very rich types of interactions with genomic, transcriptomic, methylation, epigenomic, all the types of data out there. It's not a high level one like Beacon. I don't think it's that hard to add Beacon. It's just none of our projects have asked for it. And just to remind you, we don't really have resources except assigned to a particular project. But we would love to support people if they put Beacon in to support a Beacon API through our dedicated FTE, which we'll tell you about in the next forum.
Thank you. Well, that's a great segue to the next part of this discussion today. I'm going to hand over to Kyle. Kyle, if you can introduce yourself and maybe give a little intro to the sorts of stuff you want to chat about.
Yes, Kyle Elrott at Oregon Health and Science University. We're one of the institutions that's currently working with the Gen3 team in order to kind of bring up a Gen3 instance and share data with collaborators. So we've been working with the team to identify the specific features and kind of use cases that are kind of specific to our problem that haven't been represented in the software before. And that's kind of what we wanted to do for this second section of the panel discussion, which is kind of the community, we called it the community roadmap priorities. And so for the community, what are the priorities? But I think in order to kind of control and kind of, make sure we get this as a tractable conversation, not like specific details, like I need this one feature in the roadmap, more of like, what is the general concepts or capabilities that would enable the research and projects that you're working on at a high level, so that, not micromanaging, the requests, but instead, like, what are the concepts, what are the things that would make Gen3 a more useful platform for the different research groups out there. And so we're kind of interested to hear how people are using it and what are the capabilities that would be useful for them in going forward. And so I'll open up to the floor, and if nobody says anything, then I'll just start talking about what I want. Liam, do you have your hand open?
Yeah, so we kind of want front-end framework over here. We've been promised it. It sounds really great, but just being able to use it would help us a lot with a lot of the more like customized queries that we kind of want to be able to enable. There's panels and stuff like that.
Yeah, I get that. I've been promising it. We are rapidly trying to get something out as soon as I possibly can. End of the month is a target. We'll get something out that you can start playing with me, and we'll go from there. And be happy to take feedback, and we'll be fixing whatever doesn't, whatever is missing or needs more refinement. But we think we can, that's the deliverable I'm really striving for.
Was Uwe Winter?
Hi. Let me switch on video. I just have a question. We often get asked to support more fine-grained access control than beyond than just underneath a project. Is there any works that is happening in that area?
Yeah, I'm not sure who the best person from our team to respond is. Peter, is there anyone who can speak to that, where we are on that?
Yeah, sorry, Bob, I didn't catch what the question was.
Fine grain access controls under projects. Once you answer, then I'll do some high level comments.
Sure. So we have the capability inside of Arborist to do fine grain control. So the underlying technical capability is there, but we're planning on standardizing it this year and aligning with other tooling. There isn't, I think there's no specific roadmap for using it yourself. So I don't know, Bob, I don't want to overshare.
Yeah.
You can talk as much as you want, but why don't you?
Why don't, Phil, why don't you talk a little bit about what you did, then I'll give more of a roadmap view of it. Phil
Sure.
Shum.
Sure. Just super quickly. We used basically the flexibility in specifying paths in Arborist to effect a setup where we had file specific permissions within a project, only for the files stored in S3, not for the clinical data in the data model. But we did do that, and it was fairly effective with just kind of a judicious choice of how you set those paths up. It may not be optimal, but it's functional if you need it right away.
We know some of our platforms I don't think the code has come back yet, like the Pediatric Cancer Data Commons is also doing this. From a roadmap perspective, long term, I don't know, medium to long term. So first of all, we probably are going to have to do something about more fine tune in the next year or two. The problem I have with this is, of all the things we could do, it's a lot of work, and it doesn't add a lot of huge value. It's just something you need to do in terms of the blocking and tackling. And if we look at the question, how can we use our resources to provide as much value to the research community, that we've discussed it for several years, but that doesn't come above the line. On the other hand, it's important. And so one of the things we're thinking of doing is it's a lot of work, but long term, I'd like to be able for Gen3 to come up over Keycloak or some of the other open source systems that also have commercial support with them, that has a lot of this built in. It's a lot of rework we have to do, but that would allow us to put our limited resources on other things like radically improving the analysis tool framework, accelerating the generative AI capabilities, etc. So Keycloak is one of the solutions. We try to do it in a way we support others. I'm throwing that out there because someone could be really bored and say, I want to devote all the substantial hours required to help Gen3 move to Keycloak. So that is one of the things from a roadmap perspective is tough. It's needed. On the other hand, not enough people need it, and no one who needs it is willing to pay us to do it. So it's hard to get there, and it's a lot of work. So that's yeah. So Boris, yeah, we like Keycloak. We interoperate it with some of our hubs. So it just, I have asked the question, how hard would it be to move there? It's a fair amount of work, but it may be worth doing that work at one point.
I just would like to add a comment on that. I did some work in the past to get more granular authorization, and there is some system limitation related to that. So yes, the path in arborists are very elastic, but if you get a couple of level down project, then they grow basically exponentially in the number of records that they generate inside the resource table in Arborist, and that generates a very slow Elasticsearch query on the Guppy side. So if anyone is interested in working more on that, I'm more than happy to share my experience and see if we can figure out something that works better than that.
Thank you, Luca. I'm glad you're on to represent the Pediatric Cancer Data Commons, because I know you've worked hard on that.
I guess we'll go back to Liam.
Yeah, hi. Yeah, Bob, when you mentioned, it's a lot of work and it'd be nice to go to P-SQL or other platforms where this is already built in. I think a lot of that gets back to the P-SQL graph customization, that's at the core of Gen3 and the Peregrine GraphQL interface to it. Are there any plans to, bite the bullet and deprecate that, or does Gen3 Lite include that?
You're talking about the fact that we're over P-SQL and Postgres versus a native graph database?
Yeah.
Yeah, that didn't make the cut either. That's not hard. Let me take a note. I mean, I think that's something, if we can get like a Google Summer of Code or something in turn, they could do that fairly straightforwardly. It's on the roadmap to be, right now we're putting a lot of work into supporting Atlas and OMOP. I would like to also support fairly easily just a native Postgres, I'm sorry, a native graph database. Again, it didn't make the cut, but I will put it on the Google Summer of Code because I think it's something that could get done by a Summer of Code kind of person. Or if any of you, we haven't been selected for Google Summer of Code the last couple of years. So if any of you want to do a Google Summer of Code and we can work together to get that in, I hear the need. Whatever it was, Neo4j was not mature enough when we built this, and we've never been able, we lost a couple petabytes of data that we had eventually recovered outside of Neo4j, but nowadays we would have built it over a native graph database. So it didn't make the cut for all the reasons I mentioned, but it's something we'd like to do. That's where we are. I'll try to think if there's any way other than Google Summer Code. It's not a big lift compared to some of the other things I've talked about.
Yeah.
Well, I would kind of second that in terms of, again, thinking about how it affects our stuff. One of the things that we've found is that in terms of actually switching over to something that's closer to Fire, the Fire data model includes a lot of nested structures in the actual packets, and that doesn't seem to be well represented in the current thing. And so before we can put Fire data into a Gen3 system, we have to flatten it. So we have a whole ETL process that just will take what would be a correct Fire record and flattens it so that it will fit into Gen3.
Should we on that list with graph database was a Fire server? Would that be a more straightforward approach, just to embed a Fire?
I don't want to comment on that at this moment. I think that might actually just be another kind of pigeonhole that you'd get stuck in. I think you'd want something that could support it, but I don't think you'd want to only support it. That's my kind of gut feeling right now. I could listen to more smart people talk about it though.
So Kyle, let me just play that back to make sure I understood it. If we were over a native graph database, would this be easier for you to support Fire?
I think it depends on which one is, because I think it's for us, I think, Walsh, you can correct me on this, but it was the document nesting that is in Fire that is not well represented inside of the graph endpoints in Gen 3 right now.
A couple of things using the on P-SQL graph, it's been a workhorse for Gen 3, but it's also been a long time since it's been invested in. And one of the frustrations around it is the inability to embed a nested document, and I guess it's encouraging to hear it's not a big lift. I think, our experience times a couple of other of the people on the call, just extrapolating out what the opportunity cost might have been, I think that is significant. It is a big, in aggregate, a big lift or big time spent doing things other than analysis.
I mean, this is why we set up this call. So going over a native graph database sounds like something that's really higher priority than I had thought. That's how I'm reading this.
Yeah, I think I get worried, when core foundations get old, therefore they get, I'm old, so I get to say it, get decrepit, get stiff, get unagile. So I know what that feels like personally. So it feels like P-SQL graph is starting to be, starting to show its age, and it is at the core of, the Gen 3 submission system, and things like that. So it feels like I bump it up higher on the priority personally.
Is anyone working on that from the community?
I guess the only thing we've done is kind of bypass it as much as possible, and when we get more into supporting users who are doing analytics, it's a serious question whether we expose that to them, expose P-SQL graph to them or not. Give them a way to securely query data.
Any comment from someone on our team? I haven't, I know this is a problem. I haven't thought about it in a long time.
I will just say that I have looked into moving our Postgres database or graph database into the AWS one. I don't remember the name of it. Neptune. Correct. Yep. And it, I think moving the data is actually simple. It's just figuring out how to integrate the rest of our stuff around it. There's just some moving parts that we have to figure out along the way.
Yeah, we've been doing some prototyping and testing, and I think the hardest parts that we found are, first, we're targeting what will be front-end framework, because obviously that's one of the biggest consumers of it. And so until that settles down and we know the full extent of the schema that it needs, that's one thing that has to be supported. And the other is actually correctly connecting into Arborist. So I think on our end, we had to write a whole bunch of Arborist client code in order to make sure that we were properly filtering the queries. And so I think maybe if we're thinking about like how, again, what an app is when it comes into the Gen 3 environment, what does it need in order to be developed? So obviously there's a lot of people here that are going to do really interesting kind of topical research that's specific to their their thing, and maybe isn't something that's part of core Gen 3, but what are the APIs that they need in order to make them work? And so we talked about, I think Craig had kind of hand waved over, like, yes, there would be data systems that would sit inside of the Gen 3 system. But like, from our experience, like plugging into Arborist was difficult when writing new software. What does the framework look like for new apps that come into the system? And is that something, if a better, I guess, server-side app definition, like, okay, this is how your query engine would fit into the Gen 3 framework, if that was well-defined, would that enable the community to do their own independent development and develop their own, query engines and data engines that would be server-side, but still have direct access to all the data and do the queries and calculations necessary, while respecting the security boundaries? Is that, does anybody have any opinions about that?
Let me just see who's on our team.
I'm also hoping for opinions from
That would be great.
other groups. I know, like I said, it would be terrible if like my team just says what we want and nobody else says anything else. So please, if anybody has any opinions about the priorities about like what's going forward, I mean, this is a community section of the conversation.
Thank you. All the happy not to talk about this.
I could do that professor thing where you just randomly start pointing at people and make them talk. Just pick names out of a hat if you want.
Let me throw something out, maybe as a teaser, Kyle. Again, I'm happy not to have to answer this like as Bob is, because I'd rather hear what folks need. But thinking in terms of not just for this point, but not for the front-end framework in particular, or for databases, or for basically any place where there's a point of extension to Gen 3, it is on our current, let's say it's on our current whiteboards, how to define the ways to plug into it. Because as we think about accepting code and community contributions, we've been trying to think, how do we keep proper isolation between the things that we need to maintain to certain standards for what we're operating because of specific compliance requirements we have, versus restricting folks who may not be operating there, might be in a different compliance regime, without limiting them. So in general, this idea of like pluggable points, well-defined ways of putting things in that don't involve reworking an entire service, but make it extensible, is something that we're interested in. I would be interested in hearing feedback from the community about ways in which that would be useful, or specific parts of the Gen 3 platform for which that would be useful.
Yeah, I think that's a really good way to kind of maybe kind of drive the conversation. I remember at one point I was looking at, was it Hatchery? And I think there was an open API definition, but it was just an abstract document, and the actual definition of the API only barely matched it. And that was, I think, a year or two ago. So what the current state I can't say is. So I think maybe more formalized definition of these boundaries between the different services, and kind of agreement like, okay, this is the full documentation for a developer who would be coming into the system, how they would plug into this data environment and make a plugin or a piece of code that can extend Gen 3. If that's where the time and energy is spent, is that the thing that really kind of enables the most number of labs to get what they need out of Gen 3?
I think having a proper API definition is definitely a good start. I think another thing that is really complicated to understand is how the individual services interconnect, at least when you're coming fresh. And so having an understanding, if it's a sequence diagram of how a request that is made against Guppy, for example, is evaluated with, I don't think Guppy does Arborist, but other things do, for example, interact with Arborist. How is that being done? And how does that then lead to a result set that's returned to the user through this API is really important, because sometimes I agree there is things that we might have to change to a service that you can't take into the open source code for compliance reasons. But in the first hand, need to understand which code I actually need to change. And that's really difficult because I don't understand how the microservices interconnect, right? In order to achieve a high level goal, like respond to a Guppy request or.
Would would a hello world like Beacon be a good example where someone says, okay, let's assume this is the documentation of how you would write Beacon as a plugin. And the Beacon would define how it is exposed into the external API, how it does receives a request, does an arborist filter to ensure that it's accessed, how it finds the correct file that it's going to pull the variant out of, and then returns that. And that's documented as the hello world for a Gen 3 plugin.
Yeah, I think that would be very helpful. Right. And I think if you document that with sequence diagrams as well, which are really key for me to see how the information flows to the services, then you're providing already all the information that I need as a developer to look at it and say, oh, okay, so this service makes actually the decision about, Arborist makes the decision about the policies, right? This is how Arborist makes the decision. That's the input information it takes. This is coming from the database. This is coming from the request. And then the decision is made in there somehow. That would be super helpful.
Okay, any last responses from Chicago? Because Stephen, you were keeping track of time. Are we on time, or do we have need to move to the next topic?
We are. I guess if there's more interest in talking about this topic, then let's keep that going. But
okay, I want to make sure. I just wanted to be respectful of, I guess, the next topic. But I personally find this topic to be incredibly important and pertinent. But I'm really interested to hear again from other members of the community. What is I like this idea of, understanding that the Gen 3 team's time is committed to specific topics or tasks. They have a limited amount of actual capacity to respond to things. What are the things that have the best value proposition for the community going forward? Again, to enable the most number of people to get the most amount out of Gen 3. Claire, I see you raised your hand.
Yeah, so I had a thought on this, and I guess the question is this an us and our use case, or is it a more general one? And so we have been and need to do more work on improving how we ingest data into Gen 3. Essentially, I guess our use case is we're a repository, so very much we have users interacting and submitting data. And currently, we don't feel it's sort of easy enough for a user external to sort of our team to do that submission themselves. So we handhold and we help and we do that, and we've been sort of automating and putting validation and additional validation in place and kind of helping. I'm not sure if we've missed other ways that people do it more easily, or maybe this is a sort of a core feature of Gen 3 that we've misunderstood. But I'd be really keen to know if anyone else has external users doing that data submission and what that workflow kind of looks like, because it's something we've found challenging and are sort of working through to improve.
I think
I'll just say that we don't have an answer, but it's also of great interest to us. So.
Yeah, Leo.
Yeah, I guess that's what we've been working on, is trying to make our implementation of Gen 3 that we're going to use for ACE more similar to systems like Terra or Sage, where users are creating projects kind of on the fly. So we've putting some instrumentation around the Gen 3 client and the Gen 3 SDK to provide a roughly a Git-like environment where they're pushing metadata and files up, and have a command line interfaced into Gen3's requester so that they can request that projects be created. Those requests can be signed or approved by the data access committee or data steward. Likewise, about adding users to projects, that it's more data submitter driven, not the admin's job. I think the tip of the spear on that, where we're at, is the sheepdog or submitter rights, or it appears to be an all or nothing. I can't say you can create a project in this program but not delete it in some other program. So that might be the one. Right now, we're thinking that's the one area where we will have admins involved in project creations. But other than that, it should be all end user driven, between the end user being the submitter and the end user being the data steward or data access committee approver or signer.
That sounds very exciting. I think especially that also approver and kind of being their own DAC as well as sounds like a very, very exciting feature. So that's awesome to hear that you guys are working in that direction. I think some of our users are just, sort of talking about GitHub and doing it via command line. I think for some of our users, we would still struggle with that level. I guess we've got quite a mix of skill sets. So I think we will need to work on sort of a UI version is my sort of thinking at this point. But yeah, great to hear that progress.
Yeah, for sure. We just elected to just do it from the command line first, and then as front end framework level, it might be a
Yeah, and I think the other thing that we've been trying to just figure out is what is the correct analogy for those operations. I think as Brian alluded to, we were looking at Git and how Git works in terms of this idea of polls and pushes, committing, and cloning, in order to kind of organize a project, and how you kind of integrate changes into it. So we're seeing if that analogy works well with the API and if there's any faults there. And it's an experiment right now. We think it'll be okay, but it's nice to hear that other groups are kind of, again, interested in this use case. I'll say from experience, having worked on several NCI projects, they're back-ended by, the GDC, but then they always have a Synapse project for the working group to just post random files. And so you end up with this bifurcation of work where all the official data is in, the GDC derived system, and all the kind of analysis and derived work is in a completely different system. And it would be nice to find a way to have them, again, Gen3 manage both conversations at the same time. So you could have, here's all the official produced files, and this is the conversation of files that occurred as a result of that, as part of the analysis working group, going through and looking at all of the files and coming up with conclusions and generating analytical results. And if there was a way to track the provenance from that, to say, okay, this file right here is derived from these upstream files, that would be, again, something that we would like to see in the system to kind of enable, again, this more kind of holistic framework of analysis. Is there any other groups that have, again, I'm really interested to hear if there are any other use cases or ways that people are using Gen3, and if, or perhaps what we talked about today kind of covered what people need.
I have one other thing that I'll throw out there in the silence. And this is probably a little bit specific and a little bit in the weeds, but because we have a data Gen3 that's for taonga species, so our native, our treasured species within New Zealand, we have a lot of dual language in our Gen3, and it doesn't support macrons. So that's one of our very specific things that is on our list to sort of investigate of, is this easy to change and configure, or is this something that's really quite hard? So we will have a look at that and see how hard it is. But I don't know if anyone else has that consideration, but that's we managed to break our data dictionary beautifully, putting in macrons, and it took us a while to work out what we'd done wrong. But so we'll investigate that shortly.
Okay, Stephen, do you want to cover move on to the next section?
I do. Was that a response to Claire briefly for 15
No, I
seconds?
just wanted to put another point out there that I see coming at us. Let's steamroll it. So we've just talked a bit about Keycloak, and also integrating a DAC. So I think these two things are coming at us. I think in particular, implementing access through scope token in the access token via OIDC is something that's coming our direction. And potentially data access through a DAC and then encoding that into a visa is looking into our direction. Those two things are coming pretty soon, I guess, for us.
Thank you. Thank you, Kyle, for leading that discussion. Lots of great ideas, and I think highlighting the value of getting everyone together to exchange ideas and finding out that other people are working on stuff or thinking in that direction as well is super important. So thanks. We have a few minutes left. I will say that I guess today's conversation was very much designed as the start of a longer kind of community-oriented or community design conversation. So our next session that we have, our next forum, is going to really be, I guess, focused around two topics. One of them is around, like Bob said, the kind of technicalities of the PR process and the people involved, which is great to hear that in the roadmap announcements earlier. But also we the steering committee want to spend some time working with you on designing what these kind of community interactions look like and how we can work better together moving forward. So I thought we might close off just by really hearing some thoughts both from Claire and Plowman around their thoughts on what sort of things we need to focus on and how we can kind of have this discussion moving forward. So I might start with Claire, and you've got a couple of minutes each, and then we'll close off.
Thanks, Stephen. So I guess just very briefly, I think we've discussed already today a few topics that are of, I guess, really strong interest to a subset of us. So I think for me, being able to have a community that we can actually have sort of, I don't know, self-assembled working groups of interest for specific kind of use cases or features that we can kind of work together to develop in order to then contribute back. And I guess getting a sense quite early on of whether it's of interest to the wider community and therefore makes sense to contribute back to the Gen3 code base will be quite important. So obviously, Michael and the Gen3 team keeping you involved in oversight of that, but also being able to, I think, not try and, I think there's 60 of us on the call, not trying to have everyone in every meeting, but really just groups that are keen on particular kind of use cases, so that we can, agree on progress and really make those features happen, is, I guess, my 2 minutes worth. So I'll pass on to Plowman. Thank you.
Thank you, Claire. Yes, this is great, and it's so good to hear that the community is contributing and making changes and adding value capabilities to the system. The one thing is, though, I think, as Bob mentioned, we need to work and elevate our code dev model. So a lot of the great work that you guys are doing doesn't stay siloed within one organization and require just always conversations back and forth, and having the PR technical capabilities doing some of the checks is great. I just want to echo this group, just maybe perhaps also think through a way we can create a process, right? That we can all follow, that all these features or whichever features are agreed upon, then can make it into the general Gen 3 code base. And we think through, the outline around that, how we get it done, create the strategy and plan, including some of the technical capabilities that are already being put in place, and allow that to be something that even new people get to see, and they don't have to learn the hard way. I was thinking that we could, with a couple volunteers, start outlining that process of what it would look like, and then start filling in the process in a way that works. And then also share with the broader group here, and we'll have a solid plan to, contribute to the code base.
Perfect. Thank you. Thank you, Claire. Thank you, Parman. And yes, as echoing Parman's idea there around assembling a smaller group to help us design some of these processes in the community is certainly something we're going to be doing over the next month or two, building that group. So thank you. All right, thanks everyone. I'll hand back to Michael to close off.
Thanks, Stephen. Thanks. This is great, everyone. Thanks to the steering committee for managing these discussions at the end. Thanks to the community for giving your feedback, and of course, thanks to the CTDS Gen 3 staff as well that are here to help listen and contribute. We will get these slides and video up ASAP. We'll create some sort of, I think, roadmap document where we can track this a little bit TBD how that looks. But the steering committee will be meeting and discussing what the next meeting will involve. But as Stephen said, it's very likely going to include a more in-depth discussion of how we manage community contributions as well as the community's design process. So I'll just let Bob close if you have anything else to add.
I don't. I very much want to thank the people who participate in the community discussion and those who led it. So thanks again, and we'll do this next month. And if you have particular things that you want for a future Gen 3 forum, please send it to Michael. There are a number of topics out there that we could add that seem to be of interest, especially if there's a small group that did a little work prior to the community forum.
Okay, well, thanks everyone. Take care. See you soon.
Thank you.
Thanks,
everyone.
Thanks. Have a good one, guys.
Bye.